All right, so normally when the US media talks about some of the costs that have been associated with our endless wars, whether it's in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or any of the other countries that we have been involved in over the course of the war on terror, typically what they focus on is the cost of like US troop lives and the total actual monetary cost of the war. And those are useful in terms of discussing what we've actually done, where have those resources gone. American troop lives obviously should be something that we take into consideration, but often what is not discussed as much, nearly not enough, is the civilian casualties. And so in this, I wanted to focus specifically on some of those other data points that we were just talking about, but also specifically on US airstrikes. And why? Because Joe Biden, as he has said, as we are exiting our boots on the ground presence in Afghanistan, he has been saying repeatedly, I want to focus on more of our over the horizon capabilities in Afghanistan. And so basically what he means is that the US military now, after fighting the Taliban for 20 years, is going to turn around and be working with the Taliban in all likelihood, and be working with them to conduct airstrikes against whether it's ISIS-K or other factions within Afghanistan. And so this is not just the case in Afghanistan, it's also in Syria, it's also in Somalia, where we are conducting airstrikes as well. Basically, we are transitioning to a different period of warfare where we focus significantly more heavier with drones and airstrikes like this instead of boots on the ground troops. And so it's important to understand what the consequences of this are inevitably going to continue to be. And so we have some new data on this with an article from Kenny Stansel from Common Dreams here. U.S. airstrikes have killed up to 48,000 civilians since 9/11, according to this analysis. So on average, U.S.-led airstrikes have killed more than 1,000 civilians a year since 2001. So that's what, like 3 per day. So just an absolutely atrocious and unacceptable standard. But here are some of the details on this. So airstrikes conducted by the United States have killed between 22,000 and 48,000 civilians since September 11, 2001, according to a report published Monday by Air Wars, a military watchdog that monitors and seeks to reduce civilian harms in violent conflict zones. And they get to their analysis and how they go about doing it, because it can be genuinely difficult to actually get an accurate picture of how many people have died, specifically because the Pentagon and the US military are not good at actually accurately counting those deaths, and frequently intentionally undercount them, as we are going to get to. But the new analysis, released ahead of the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the retaliatory launch of the so-called war on terror, came just days after a US drone strike killed at least 10 members of a single family in Kabul amid the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. And remember, this airstrike that killed 10 members of that one family, including 6 children, they said immediately in the aftermath of that strike, oh, we just killed an ISIS-K member, okay? The Pentagon, our commanders, they basically, the media, initially the reports were, we just killed an ISIS-K member. So as we are going to be seeing more airstrikes, more drone strikes in Afghanistan and around the rest of Central Asia or the Middle East, or even in countries in Africa, they are going to be continuing to say, oh, well, we just killed the bad guys, don't worry about it, don't think about it, don't look into it. Meanwhile, we know that these casualties are often associated and tied with a lot of those airstrikes. But they continue saying, while the Brown University's Cost of War project estimates that over 387,000 civilians have been killed as a result of the war on terror, Air Wars sought to answer a specific question: how many civilians have likely been killed by U.S. airstrikes specifically over the last 20 years? And the answer, Air Wars found, is at least 22,679 and potentially as many as 48,308 civilians. So just to jump to this, the Brown University's Cost of War thing, because I think this also gives some good statistics just to give us a picture on the overall scope of this war. So they say that over 929,000 people, almost a million people, have died in the post 9/11 wars due to direct war violence, and several times as many due to the reverberating effects of war. So almost a million just in terms of the direct war conflict itself, and then millions more that have been caught up as casualties as a direct result of that war in a more abstract sense. But again, that 387,000 number of civilians that have been killed as a result of the fighting, 38 million the number of war refugees and displaced people. 38 million people were displaced as a result of the war on terror. 38 million. Just an absolutely astonishing, unimaginably large figure there. And in addition to that, the cost of it. The U.S. federal price tag for the post 9/11 wars is $8 trillion. And you can see this breakdown here on what we were actually spending it on. Over 2.1 trillion of that was overseas contingency operations appropriations for the Department of Defense. So basically the DoD. Then you see Homeland Security, Veterans Care, which is going to skyrocket into the future as we continue needing to provide care for those veterans. Interest alone is $1 trillion. And and increases to base and State Department, etc. So this is just what's like on paper, $8 trillion. So that's the estimated cost of post 9/11 war spending, but just an absolutely ridiculous figure as we turn around now and we are debating whether or not we should invest like $3.5 trillion over the next decade on infrastructure. It's like we just spent almost double that over these last 20 years on just a pointless fucking war on terror that is never ending and is completely unsuccessful. So it's ridiculous and grotesque at every level, but that's just some of the data from that Brown study that came out as well. And so they continue on this front, saying that acknowledging the imprecision of their estimate, again, this is where it gets kind of complex, but the group noted that, quote, the gap between these two figures of the 22,000 to 48,000 estimate reflects the many unknowns when it comes to civilian harm in war, and, quote, belligerents rarely track the effects of their own actions, and even when they do so poorly. The researchers wrote, it is left to local communities, civil society, and international agencies to count the costs, and that's basically exactly what they did in their methodology. And they say, based on its comprehensive review of credible sources, Air Wars identified 2003 as the deadliest year of the war on terror, when a minimum of 5,500 civilians were reported to have been killed by U.S. actions, and the next deadliest came under the Trump administration in 2017, when at least 4,900 civilians were likely killed, the vast majority in alleged coalition bombing of Iraq and Syria, researchers wrote. However, if we include maximum estimates of civilian harm in 2017, was in fact the worst year for civilian casualties, with upwards of 19,600 on the upwards estimate there. So you see, I mean, under the Trump administration, significantly ramping up these strikes that are causing civilian deaths. So started the war off in the invasion of Iraq and having that massive spike, and then finishing it off relatively at the end of or the beginning of Trump's administration. But yeah, I mean, those are just some of the statistics just to give you a perspective on how destructive and damaging this actually was. And you see all of the different countries that we have been involved in. I mean, they have Yemen, Syria, Somalia, Pakistan, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, that we are just bombing into oblivion and catching civilians in our wake. And in addition to that, I mean, again, the Pentagon undercounts. So this is all based on statistics and figures that they're having to make general estimates about by pulling from a number of different sources who have actually been doing the work to count these numbers, because the Pentagon is consistently undercounting civilian casualties in a new report, according to experts. So this is something that's been consistent over the entirety of the war. But again, I mean, listen, when you have upwards of 48,000 civilians being caught up in this war on terror, with hundreds of thousands more that have been killed over this process generally, that was just airstrikes, right? 48,000 killed by airstrikes. And this is what's going to be continuing into the future. So understand, when Biden ramps down the war in Afghanistan, he pulls some of our boots on the ground troops, he's telling you straight up, I am going to be maintaining my over-the-horizon capabilities. I'm going to be maintaining the drone programs, the airstrikes. We're going to be working with the Taliban in order to conduct those airstrikes against ISIS-K members, which, yes, ISIS is terrible, and yes, many of these strikes will kill ISIS members, but they're also inevitably going to be killing civilians. So you have to take that into consideration and continue to be extremely critical of Joe Biden as he continues this endless war on terror, even as we are winding down the endless war in Afghanistan in terms of boots on the ground presence. The CIA is going to be maintaining a presence there. Obviously, our mercenaries will likely maintain some sort of a presence there, and these over-the-horizon capabilities will be certainly maintaining a presence there, and that's what we have to keep our focus and our eyes on.